The idle Ugandan parliament, and our reporter from Kampala, Uganda, Solomon Serwanja, will be joining us later in the bulletin to explain to us how exactly the August House in Uganda found itself idle. Now, moving on, the government of Sudan has been accused of using chemical weapons to kill and injure hundreds of civilians, including children. An Amnesty International investigation has gathered horrific evidence of the repeated use of what is believed to be chemical weapons against civilians in one of the most remote regions of Darfur over the past 8 months. Our reporter Zinzi Kibiku has more on that report.
In a report released Thursday, Amnesty International revealed satellite imagery, more than 200 in-depth interviews with survivors, and expert analysis of dozens of appalling images showing babies and young children with terrible injuries. The investigation indicates that at least 30 likely chemical attacks have taken place in the Jebel Mara area of Darfur since January of this year. The most recent was on 9th September 2016.
The government of Sudan has essentially launched a major offensive against the rebel group, the Sudanese Liberation Army Abdul Wahid. And in that, they have launched attacks from the air. They have launched horrific ground attacks, destroying villages, driving tens of thousands of people from their homes, as well as credible evidence that there have been a number of chemical weapons attacks in the area.
Chemical weapons have been banned for decades in recognition of the fact that the level of suffering they cause can never be justified. According to the evidence on the table, Sudan's government is now repeatedly using them against their own people. Chemical weapons bring cruel effects when they come into contact with the human body. Based on testimonies from caregivers and survivors, it is estimated that between 200 and 250 people may have died as a result of exposure to the chemical weapons agents, with many or most being children.
Amnesty International has documented at least 29 villages where we believe that suspected chemical weapons attacks took place. But on top of that, we have documented 174 villages in Jebel Mara which were affected by intentional attacks by the Sudanese authorities and irregular groups working in concert with them.
Photographs that I received did show a lot of evidence that would suggest to me that chemical weapons were used. For example, a lot of the wounds appeared circular in nature. This would appear to me like a blister that has been de-roofed, and so some of the skin has sloughed.
Hundreds more survived attacks, but in the hours and days after exposure to chemicals, developed symptoms including severe gastrointestinal conditions involving bloody vomiting and diarrhea, blistering and rashes on the skin, eye problems including complete loss of vision, and respiratory problems, which were reported to be the most common cause of death.
We have also received photographs and videos which shows the symptoms of the chemical weapons exposure. We've sent those photos and videos to 2 independent experts who have given us their analysis, and it clearly does show that there is credible evidence that some sort of chemical agent has been used in these attacks.
Had damage done to large areas of their skin. We see blisters, for example. We see indications in photos of infections that might have followed those blisters. We see examples of skin sloughing off. In fact, many of the victims refer to their skin first turning white and then actually falling off within a few days after these attacks.
One woman in her 20s was injured by a bomb which emitted a toxic cloud of smoke that fell inside her village. She and her baby became sick, and 6 months later, they are still suffering from the effects. Another woman in her 30s was at home with her children in the village of Buro when it was attacked. She told Amnesty International that she saw several bombs discharge black smoke, which then turned blue.
Pictures in conjunction with the eyewitness accounts and in conjunction with a large constellation of clinical signs and symptoms for these victims do give us enough information to make us very certain that chemicals of some sort were involved in this attack.
Many of the victims told Amnesty International that they had no access to medicine and were being treated using a combination of salt, limes, and local herbs.
One of the things I would expect with a chemical weapon would be infection in an area where there is no medical treatment. And so there was a lot of evidence of infection of the wounds in the photographs that I had seen.
In the 8 months since the offensive was launched, Amnesty International has documented scores of instances where government forces deliberately targeted civilians and civilian property. Survivors and local human rights monitors provided the names of 367 civilians, including 95 children, who were killed in Jebel Mara by government forces in the first 6 months of this year. Many people, including children, also died as a result of starvation, dehydration, or a lack of medical care in the aftermath of attacks. Zinzi Kibiku, KTN News.
All right, let's go back to that top story of the idol August House of Uganda. And to put this into perspective is our reporter in Kampala, Uganda, Solomon Serwanja, joining us. A very good evening to you, Solomon. Thank you very much for joining us here on BottomLine East Africa. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. How exactly did the Ugandan parliament find itself devoid of work?
Well, a very good evening to you, Akisa. We're live from Kampala, Uganda. Parliament of Uganda continuing to make headlines throughout the whole week. Now, the 10th Parliament has rather begun on a low note, with legislators seen as very unpleasant people. Matter of fact, we had the pig demonstration the other time. Then, of course, they're looking at them for huge expenditures, looking at spending 68 million shillings on burying an MP, but also the close to 2 billion shillings that was spent on MPs going for the UNA conference. That's the Uganda conference in the US. Now, again, they are back at it. The Speaker, Rebecca Kadaga, sent Parliament on recess just after the legislators had come back from a similar recess which was okayed by the Deputy Speaker, Jacob Olanya. Putting it clear, Kisa, the Speaker, Rebecca Kadaga, saying that we do not have any business to transact, no bills that have been tabled before the floor, and therefore there's nothing we are doing here. So go back home and maybe we'll call you at a later stage. Of course, that has been received by mixed reactions from different Ugandans, some of them saying, then why are we paying our legislators? But the oversight role continues because they are still attending committee meetings and bringing different government organs on the spot. Committees are still going on in the House, but there is no plenary. No bill is being tabled simply because government has not brought any bill to be tabled. And that leaves us with many questions unanswered. So then the Speaker directs the blame to the executive, led by President Yoweri Museveni and his cabinet, saying that cabinet has not brought forth any bill to be discussed. But think of it, Akisa, we have 431 members of parliament here in Uganda, and we don't have any private members' bill. So should we just let it go that, you know, it's only the executive that is supposed to bring bills on the floor of parliament? Can't we have a private members' bill? Those are questions that have been asked and to the different legislators by the people who voted them into parliament. Akisa.
Solomon, anyone watching this, especially if they're from Kenya or any other country in the region that has a very busy parliament, I'm sure we're finding it very difficult to understand how a whole house of more than 400 members would not have any bill to discuss. How has it been in the previous houses? Has anything like this ever happened? Would we be right to term that August House as plain lazy?
Well, playing lazy could be a bit unfair, considering Parliament has just begun. I mean, they're just 3 months into the 10th Parliament, but again, it's not an excuse enough. Now, Akisa, the executive is supposed to be coming up with different bills. Literally speaking, cabinet ministers attend meetings here in Uganda every Wednesday, and one of the issues they discuss are bills that are supposed to be tabled on the floor of Parliament. Now, according to the government chief whip, Ruth Nankabirwa, who comes from the NRM party, she did come out clearly, and she said that we have at least 4 bills that have been presented before the House, but they have not been put on the order paper, and the Speaker is speaking otherwise. So who is fooling who is the question? Nevertheless, the Minister for Constitutional Affairs and Justice, Honorable Kahindo Tafire, is supposed to be coming up with the Constitutional Amendments Bill 2016. Among others, issues will be discussed in that law. But you also know that the Constitutional Amendments Bill comes after spread consultations from across the public public and other stakeholders. But let's look at how the last parliament played out. Now, a number of bills were passed, but also similarly, a number of them did not make it through the 9th parliament. And particularly the issue that was raised in the last parliament were the electoral reforms that were supposed to be coming through, the bill that was supposed to change electoral reforms. Unfortunately, the law was passed hurriedly and some sections were not discussed because the bill came into force onto the order paper very late, almost towards the elections. Now, some people are looking at it as a tactic that is being used by the NRM party, that bills should be brought towards the end of the the close of parliament, so that the whole bill is rushed through and the different legislators do not air out their views, so that it is rushed through for the benefit of the NRM party. Again, it's very, very bad for a 10th parliament to begin on this note, because then Ugandans look at them as just being paid when they're doing nothing. But rather we expect that as soon as the legislators come back from that recess, I'm sure that it is a sign enough that government is going to table some bills before the House so that it can be discussed. Otherwise, the debate back home here is, why are we paying our members of parliament yet they are not transacting any business, as of course reflected in the Speaker Rebecca Kadaga's statement earlier on in the week.
Big question there. We'll definitely be seeing how it goes in Uganda. Solomon, thank you very much for joining us here on Bottom Line East Africa. But before I let you go, apart from the issues you have with how the parliament is transacting its business, what are some of the other things that have made big news in Uganda this week?
Well, certainly, one of the stories that has left many of us debating is awarding more than 1,131 medals to different members of parliament who have been in parliament since Uganda got its independence. Many questions are rising. Were all these members of parliament worth that medal? Which criteria does government use, for example, to select the members who are supposed to receive this medal? And how much does government spend on these medals? Now, it's quite unfortunate that all these members of parliament, some of them have never even said anything on the on the floor of parliament. Some of them have literally kept quiet. You know, you've attended plenary before where a member of parliament is assessed and they have not even mentioned any statement on the floor of parliament. And so the question is, were all these MPs worthy to receive a medal of honor, and so that to celebrate their contribution to the development of the country? Of course, the person who is heading this, the awarding of the ceremony is a big Major General here in Uganda, and that's Major General, is a General actually, Eli Tumwine. General Eli Tumwine is the chairperson of that committee that awards medals, and so he has been put on the spot. And of course, some reports coming through that is the one who procures these medals, and therefore somehow he finds his piece of the monies that is given. Again, it's very controversial. Nevertheless, that story also continued to make headlines. Are Ugandans, are the people who are given medals worth that medal? And what is the criteria that they use to award this medal? So that also was a story that made headlines here in Uganda, Akisa.
Interesting situation there, but opposition leader Dr. Akisa Wandera is expected to fly into the country from his Europe trip this week. It was supposed to be on Thursday, I think, but was postponed to Monday. Explain to us that situation and what exactly do we expect on Monday? Will we have that homecoming, or the police still maintain that it is illegal?
Well, a showdown is what we're waiting for on Monday when Dr. Akisa Wandera returns. Of course, police has come out clearly and they say they will not allow that procession. FDC, which is the biggest opposition political party here in Uganda, continuing to mobilize its supporters to go to Entebbe and give a hero's welcome to Dr. Akisa Wandera, who has been in Europe on his defiance tour, of course spreading the message of defiance and how President Yoweri Museveni is running a dictatorship in Uganda. But again, the police, earlier on we heard from the Assistant Inspector General Police, who is also the public relations officer here in Uganda, Afande Felix Kawesi, coming out clearly that they have not gotten any authority and that they will use every strength they have and every tool to prevent that procession from coming on. But of course, Dr. Akisa Wandera's supporters are drumming up and they cannot wait for Monday when they go to Entebbe International Airport to welcome Dr. Akisa Wandera. And I mean, the question is, I mean, there are different people who have been welcomed in a similar way, for example, and police has given them, you know, an escort. They have given them lead cars so that they can pave a way and deal with the traffic. The people are asking, why not for Dr. Akisa Besigye? Well, police came out clearly on that issue and they said Besigye is just a normal Ugandan who is also a party member. He's not in the leadership of Forum for Democratic Change. He was just a former presidential candidate who lost the elections, and therefore there's nothing special for him to be given, you know, an open road so that the procession should escort him to the capital, Kampala. And so we wait, Akisa, to see what will come out on Monday. But history tells us that police has always had issues with Dr. Akisa Besigye, and certainly we will see some tear gas and some batons, and definitely Dr. Akisa Besigye will be on front cover in Uganda, but also internationally, which also gives him political capital, Akisa.
Solomon, thank you very much for that. Thank you for speaking to us here on Bottom Line East Africa. That is Solomon Serwanja joining us from Kampala, Uganda, with the latest news from Uganda. Now, Tanzanian President John Pombe Magufuli is 1 month shy from marking his first year in office. Here at Bottom Line East Africa, we assess his performance through an interview with a political analyst, Patience Mlowe, who works for the Legal and Human Rights Center in Tanzania.
President Magufuli is a man of action. President Magufuli came as a gift to Tanzanians, as he has been saying by himself, in demanding accountability in public sector. There has been quite a number of challenges in public sector in the past. Number of corruption scandals. No actions were being taken. But within 1 year, President Magufuli has been able to bring major reforms in public sector by demanding accountability. We have seen big people, giants, tycoons in Tanzania politics, who have been holding public offices being sent out of office due to their embezzlement, due to their abuse of offices. In the past, it wasn't the case. But on the negative aspect, I see there is a slight challenge where there is a failure to observe rule of law. Observing rule of law is quite a big challenge under this regime. We find some actions being taken contrary to the laws that we have. For instance, banning political parties to conduct their political business. That's contrary to the Political Parties Act of 1992, which allows for any registered party to conduct their political businesses in all areas of the country as they are registered to do so. But now there are some restrictions that you are not allowed to conduct any politics rallies up to 2020. For sure, now everybody has fear, and this fear has gone even to the government itself, to the government departments. When you go in different offices, you find government officials are not free to give out their decisions sometimes because of fear. They fear of unknown. They fear maybe Magufuli gonna do this. There is a very common phrase here in Tanzania, kutumbua majipu. You know, it's very common. Everybody fears that maybe President Magufuli will send me out of office. You know, the foreign policy for the country right now, we can say it has changed drastically compared with the previous regime. Now there is limitation for the public officials going abroad. Since when Magufuli got into power, has put some strict measures for the public officials to travel abroad. You cannot travel abroad without the permission from the office of permanent secretary. You see, those are some of the restrictions. In one hand, it's okay that we are saving for the nation, for the unnecessary expenditure that have been incurred in the past, that we can allocate them in other social services. But on the negative sense of it, at some point as a nation, we can lose a lot, especially in the area of technology, science and technology, economic development and integration. We need people to go abroad. Africa nations depend technologically to the foreign world. That is undisputable fact. We all agree we owe a lot in terms of technology from developed countries. The 4 years, I see economically that we are going to make big progress in terms of economic as a country. But on the other hand, politically, I see there are going to be major drawbacks, setbacks, where we are going backward. We are not making progress in terms of freedom of expression, in terms of issues of right to information. Things are not going to be the same. In the past, there were some laxity in enforcing our immigration laws. That's why we had a number of non-Tanzanians who were coming to work in the country. We had a number of Chinese here in Tanzania without working permits, doing cash works. Yeah, we have a number of our fellow here, our neighbors, Kenyans, doing a number of jobs here in Tanzania in the past. But most of them were coming in Tanzania illegally. And this is what President Magufuli stands for. Wants people to follow proper procedures to obtain working permits to work in the country. For that, I think still opportunities are there for non-Tanzanians to come and work in Tanzania. For instance, in the education sector, most of our English medium schools here in Tanzania depends teachers from Kenya. Yeah. When President Magufuli just announced that if you don't have working permit, you have to go back to your country, majority of the schools changed drastically.
This is KTN News.
Majina poa bana.
Sawa, niko karibu.
Wewe,
David harakisha unatuchelewesha.
Ukiwa na sawa. Sawa. Sawa.
Introducing sour bathing soap from Bonnie. It's so sour you want to shower for hours.
Two ways of dealing with corruption. One, you must prevent it. You must put preventive measures. This includes transparent systems that one can verify so that it cannot, and also block ways in which people can be corrupt. That's by way of prevention. If it occurs, then sanction must follow, and in my view, even retribution.
I told you to bring your mother, not your sister.
But teacher, she is my mother.
Yeah, mama.
But her mother.
Young lady, please excuse me as I call her mother. I'm terribly sorry. It's just that you look so young. Please excuse us. Your skin looks so edible. Can I touch?
The purest way to keep your skin moisturized, glowing, and looking young day after day.
This is KTN News.
Welcome back. You are watching BottomLine East Africa. Many thanks for staying with us. Let's now go to the world's youngest country, South Sudanese armed opposition group. The Sudan People Liberation Movement in opposition has declared armed resistance against President Salva Kiir's regime. The party claims Kiir's leadership has been imposed on them by the ongoing political and security situations across the country due to the collapse of the August 2015 peace agreement. Now, in a separate move, another faction, the South Sudan Democratic Movement, stated their unification with forces opposed to the regime to combat cooperation with the Kiir regime. Zinzi Kibiku has that story.
Former South Sudan First Vice President Riek Machar has called for an armed struggle against the government of President Salva Kiir, a move that could see a renewal of the country's civil war. The call came from following a meeting in Khartoum of Machar's Sudan's People Liberation Movement in opposition. Leader Riek Machar and top officials of the opposition SPLMIO party issued a statement saying the forces would reorganize to wage a popular armed resistance against the authoritarian and racist regime of President Salva Kiir. It is the first political statement by Machar since he fled South Sudan in August. The movement signed a peace deal in the South Sudan's government in August 2015, but implementation was delayed and largely fell apart after the sides clashed in the capital in July. The opposition leader spokesman, however, pointed out that in case President Kiir returns to the agreement by undoing the wrong decisions he made, including to stop the ongoing military offensive, make Taban Deng step down as first vice president, demilitarize the capital Juba and other major towns, as well as accept the proposed rapid deployment of a third-party force in the capital, the agreement can be resuscitated. Machar has demanded that the government accept the UN Security Council's decision to send an additional 4,000 peacekeepers to increase the size of the existing UN force. The Kiir government has resisted the UN decision, saying it violates South Sudan's sovereignty. State Department officials say if South Sudan doesn't accept the additional peacekeepers, the US will support an arms embargo on the country. Machar, who is in Khartoum recuperating from injuries he sustained in July, has not made any public statement. Critics have accused the UN of issuing empty threats against President Kiir for violating the peace agreement without any consequences. Zinzi Kibiku, KTN News.
Well, that story by Zinzi Kibiku brings us to our main discussion in the program tonight. And joining me in studio is Adel Sandrai, who is a representative for the SPLM in opposition, of course, from South Sudan, to understand some of the issues that the Riek Machar side have. And I think we have the right man in studio. A very good evening to you, sir.
Thank you very much. A very good evening to you, too.
Thank you very much for coming into for BottomLine East Africa.
Thank you for having me.
Well, from that story we've just seen from Zinzi Kibiku, it's that declaration by Riek Machar, who is the leader of opposition, that it is time for an armed resistance. Why an armed rebellion?
Thank you very much. That is the last option after the collapse of the peace agreement and all the efforts that the regional powers, international stakeholders put together, efforts to be able to resuscitate the peace agreement. To give you the history,
yes,
is that when the war broke out in on July 8th in the presidential palace, immediately after that, on the 11th, there was an extraordinary meeting of the IGAD foreign ministers in Nairobi that said they want to restore the peace process. After that, there was the AU summit in Kigali on the 14th, also calling for re-establishment of the peace process. There was the visit of the IGAD chief of staff to Juba on the 14th of July. all effort to restore or resuscitate the peace process. Added on top of that, on the 16th of July, there was the IGAD Plus summit, also addressing the violence that has interfered with the implementation of the peace process.
But all this failed.
All this has not, restored the implementation of the peace agreement.
Yeah.
Not only that, you go to AU summit, 616. You go to UN Security Council resolution, all calling for the re-institution of the process. We should stop the war and go where? Go to peace implementation. These are all who are all ignored by the government. We are not saying we want to rush to war. What we want is that all these efforts that were done for the last, from the 11th of July up to the 16th of August, that those processes should be able to restore the peace process back on track. But it has failed.
Yes, yes.
It has failed. In the state now, what is happening is there is, sort of appeasement policy to deny the implementation of the peace agreement.
When you say you've exhausted all avenues, or calling for an armed rebellion was your last resort, does it mean you have exhausted all the peaceful avenues or the peaceful solutions that could be there for South Sudan?
Not yet. We have a light at the end of the tunnel. There is the regional protection force that is supposed to be in Juba to secure the environment, to provide the security to enable for the implementation of the peace agreement. And Dr. Machar is saying if the protection forces are in Juba secures the city for peaceful implementation of the peace agreement, we will go back to Juba and implement the peace agreement.
So that means the SPLM in opposition has not yet given up on that collapsed peace agreement?
No, we have not.
So what do you want done? There was a meeting of Riek Machar in Khartoum with the top leadership of SPLM in opposition. Among the things, or among the resolutions made, was the armed resistance, the calling for an armed resistance. What are some of the other resolutions you reached at in that particular meeting, assuming you're part of it?
I wasn't part of it, but I was heavily involved behind the door as I walked out from Nairobi. The resolution, there was various resolutions on that document. And the most important one to me is the calling for the restoration of the implementation of peace agreement. The declaration of the war, came about of the stubbornness of the government of Salva Kiir not to allow for the implementation of the peace agreement to go ahead.
So you've decided it is the armed rebellion. What exactly does this mean for the people of South Sudan? What are you telling the people of South Sudan?
Well, the people of South Sudan have a right to life. They have the right to security. They have the right for development services. They have the right to media to express themselves. But this is denied by the regime in Juba. So people, once the government is denying to you development, is denying security. As we speak, there are hundreds of thousands of South Sudanese in the UN compounds within their country, indicating that the government has failed to give them security. Yesterday, up to date, I received a report that additional 1,000 people were forced into the UN camps from yesterday to today by the government security forces. There was a shootout in Tonping, a suburb of the capital, 3 nights ago. The government was shooting the Morley community because one general refused to work with the government. So soldiers went to his compound and started shooting. And the Murle community found themselves to be insecure, so they decided to go to the UN compound for security.
Kir's government has slammed this call for an armed resistance, saying that Riek Machar has no place in the politics of South Sudan. What is the reaction to that?
Well, Riek Machar is South Sudanese with all the rights to participate in politics. So I don't see, there's nothing in the constitution of South Sudan, if there is one, that denies anybody, any South Sudanese, from participating in politics. So he has the right to participate in politics. Why should President Salva Kiir deny him his rights to participate in politics?
But as a top leader of the opposition, does he still have a place in the politics?
He has a place. He is the father of the nation. He is part of the process to bring South Sudan as an independent country. And he has that legacy, and nobody should deny him that legacy.
Edel, the war in South Sudan has raged on for years. In fact, since you got the independence from Sudan, the people of South Sudan have not really found true peace, so to speak. Does the peace of South Sudan depend on Salva Kiir and Riek Machar? Does it depend on these two leaders?
No. South Sudanese have not enjoyed peace since independence because those who liberated the country have failed to build a nation. They have failed to build a state that is peaceful and stable.
Why?
Lack of capacity, you can call it, or lack of not knowing exactly what to do with the country. You know, you know the reports that came out recently that there was widespread corruption,
yes,
looting, and all sorts of things. A country cannot be run like that. That's the essence of the crisis in South Sudan at the moment. There are people, there are cliques in the regime of Salva Kiir who will want to run that country as their own kitchen. They can do whatever they want to do there. And when they cook the food, they only eat with their children and their relatives. They don't think the majority of South Sudanese will need to participate in the food that is cooked from the kitchen in South Sudan.
Well, I should have you and someone from the government to listen or to respond to these allegations, but I'm afraid we'll have to end it there. We don't have too much time, but thank you very much, Adel, for coming in and helping us understand some of the demands that the SPLM in opposition have. Thank you very much for coming in. Adel Sandrai is the representative of the South Sudan the SPLM rather, in opposition, and is joining us in studio, of course, speaking about what is happening in South Sudan and that call for an armed resistance from Riek Machar, the former vice president. Now let's head over to Rwanda, where our reporter Eugene Anangwe now joins us via phone to get updates on what exactly has been making headlines in Rwanda this week and some of the things we should be expecting come next week. A very good evening to you, Eugene. Many thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure speaking to you. Of course, we will start with the Rwanda Airbus. It must be an exciting time to be in Rwanda.
Right, Akisa. Good evening to you and to our viewers of BottomLine East Africa. Definitely, this is a major milestone for Rwanda's aviation industry. And of course, for those who might not be knowing what we are talking about, it's definitely the national carrier of Rwanda finally acquired one of its expected two Airbus 330-200 to expand its flights across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Akisa, the aircraft is actually named Ubumwe. This is a Rwandese word for unity and is now the talk of town, more so among those who are well-versed with aviation matters. Let me just describe the capacity of this particular aircraft. It is a 244-seater, ranging from 20 business class, 21 premier, and 203 economy class. And of course, it is also important to understand that Rwanda currently operates a fleet of 9 aircraft and is expecting to add 4 other new planes, including another Airbus, which is expected to be delivered in November 2016. Quite exciting news and times in Rwanda's aviation sector. Akisa.
And away from that, there is a professor who has been deported, so to speak, back to Rwanda to face charges against the 1994 genocide. Keep us up to speed with that.
Right. this professor is called Leopold Munyakazi, who is now 65 years. He has actually been in the United States lecturing in some university there, and he has been wanted in Rwanda, and he actually arrived in the U.S. in 2004 after leaving Rwanda a decade earlier, and until this week he was in a prison in the state of Alabama fighting extradition. Now, it is important to also understand that he had requested for asylum, and what he was citing was fears of being tried unfairly if he was to be extradited back to Rwanda, but he lost that case. And it is also important to note that the United States last deported such a person or such a genocide suspect in 2011 when one Marie Vianney Mudahinyuka, who is now serving life in prison here in Rwanda, was handed over to Rwandan officials. It is also important to know that Rwandan officials have issued 500 indictments against genocide fugitives living in various countries, including the U.S. But according to Rwanda's justice minister, the response to these indictments has been very slow. Only 50 suspects have been extradited to face justice, and fewer than 20 have been tried in other countries. So it is only something that the victims of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis are looking up to see that these people are brought to book, particularly the survivors. Akisa.
East Africa, Gina Nangwe is our reporter joining us from Kigali, Rwanda, giving us updates on some of the biggest stories in Rwanda this week. And just before we finish up, let's take a look at stories that have been big this week and some of the things that we will expect next week here on the East African Review. And of course, we start off from South Sudan. The discussion we've just had here, Riek Machar, the former vice president, called for armed rebellion against the South Sudanese government. Of course, the government led by President Salva Kiir. Somalia has postponed the parliamentary elections until the end of October. These elections were meant to start next week, but they've been pushed to the end of October. Now, the Kenyan government and electoral commissioners talks on exit package. They have reached a deal that this is something that has been going on a whole week, and next week we'll be looking at what exactly that deal is. Now, the search for Kenya's Deputy Chief Justice, interviews of the applicants of this particular position have been ongoing as a search for the next Deputy Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya continues. And finally, Sudan was accused of using chemical weapons. An investigation conducted by Amnesty International showed that the government of Bashir is using chemical weapons, especially in villages in Darfur. And next week, let's take a look at what will be big. Uganda's opposition leader Kizza Besigye's homecoming is expected to be on Monday. The police have already said it is illegal. And as our reporter Solomon Serwanja says, there is a looming showdown in Uganda come Monday. And then we'll also be taking a look at the South Sudan crisis and whether there will be any development. And in Kenya, the deal of the IEBC commissioners send off a package. All right, that's all we had, Landa, for you this evening on Bottom Line East Africa. Many thanks for joining us. Up next.